That was collective consciousness, hoping that once we integrated, that we would all look after our own. But that integration is something different than what we're talking about. And so the counterintelligence program, when Mumia goes about as an investigative reporter to determine whether or not the bomb that fell in 78, 79 in August on Move, on Osage Avenue, whether or not that bomb, no, the bomb came in 85. 85, okay, 85. But I'm talking about in 78 and 78, whether or not they were justified in the shooting and the fire and all that. No one else was going to do that for our movement except somebody who cared. And he was a part of the Black Panther Party, so he knew he had to look for the hidden agenda because these people were going to trial. You see. And so if we don't have the investigative skills in our own community to investigate the things that are going on, to understand the distinction between disinformation and information, and to counter the counterintelligence, then we will be victimized consistently by counterintelligence. And so, under international law, when a person's history is so connected to the belligerence, rebellion, or violence of the people who are oppressed, that person cannot be perceived as a criminal. And under domestic law, Mumia is being tried as a criminal. How can he be a criminal? What right do they have to try him as a criminal? If he was extradited to England or any other country, before they would send him back to America on a warrant, they would sit down and say, under the extradition treaties that we have, is this man a criminal? Well, let's look at the case. Well, it just seems like it was a shooting. One guy had a gun, was shooting at someone, and somebody ended up dead. 2 people were shot. Well, who is this guy? And then they have to decide, well, he was in the Black Panther Party when he was he was a journalist when he became an adult. He was an investigative journalist. He was a part of the movement. Well, is he a criminal? Well, we can't say he's a criminal. Well, if we send him back, will his political activities be used against him in a criminal proceeding? Yes, it will. Well, then we won't send him back under international law. So if he fits the criteria under the political offense exception to extradition, then why are we allowing the United States government to execute him as a criminal? They're outside of that jurisdiction. But we don't claim international law. They don't recognize international law. We still look for the United States within its system to treat him fairly because we still feel a part of this system. But our struggle separates us under international law from domestic law because the tendency of the oppressive government is to treat all resistance as if it's criminal. Right? You see? And so, if we don't draw a line in the sand around Mumia, who will we draw it? Who will we? Because if we do not trigger international protection for just struggle, I mean, we look at the IRA, we look at the PLO, we look at the Bosnia, we look at Serbia. I mean, look at the system. I mean, the war trials that's going on in Bosnia now, and the young man who said that his general told him to slaughter all of these people. And the United States, or the United Nations, through the leadership of the United States, gets a black woman lawyer from Texas to defend defend him. And she does a tremendous job defending him. And she defends him because he did not understand his implications. I mean, she's done it under international, not under human law, whether or not it was wrong or not, but under international law. And she begs for this man's life, not to be executed. And you know, they spared this man's life. Not to say that they should, no, they should. That's not the point. But he had a fair venue. They're not giving him a fair venue. They're not giving him a fair venue because we did have a war in 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, all the way up. We did have a war. We had a war, a racial war, just like they had over there. The only reason we weren't slaughtered by whites because we defended ourselves as much as we could. But you have what Robert Williams was saying, they were shooting at him. I mean, let's look at Ahmed Evans in Cleveland. Died in jail, cancer of the spine, and no one even knows of him. There's so many of the people who defended our community, who went to jail under the criminal law, who was not seen by the Red Cross, who was not protected by international observers, who Amnesty International didn't support, who have died in these jails, and they have been heroes of our struggle. And we haven't done nothing about it. We must draw a line in the sand from America. We must do that. Because, I mean, Hugo Burnell, I mean, we can go on and on and on. And time won't allow. But we must really understand the context of which our struggle, this is not a phase, it's a long struggle. It's a long struggle. And so, Colin Telfer was not only physical, it was mental. By refusing or putting people in a position to feel that if they support the people who fought for them, by putting them in a position to feel that they would be targeted, that they would be imprisoned under the grand jury system, that they would lose their jobs, that they would take their children, that they might have to snitch on a comrade. The psychological and emotional pressure that comes with that type of threat cannot be underestimated. I mean, even more so than the war, because that's what has paralyzed our movement today in 1998. We have a paralyzed movement. The J. Edgar Hoover COINTEL program was one of the most sophisticated programs. We cannot take it from it. It was vicious, but it served its objective. And so, COINTELPRO, low-intensity warfare, are legitimate military tactics in low-intensity warfare. And low-intensity warfare is just a method of warfare that is disguised in order not to bring in outside observers. And so when we're getting ready to have a rally, hopefully one of the biggest rallies we've had in some time in Washington, to support the existence of political prisoners, to acknowledge that, the President of the United States goes to Africa. Right. Isn't that ironic?
It sure is.
He goes to Africa. When masses of people have supported Nelson Mandela here in the United States, at the sacrifice of other freedom fighters here, while we were in jail supporting his freedom, our people were supporting the freedom of a political prisoner in South Africa and not even acknowledging that we existed. And I don't think we exist without contradictions. But that's not acid test, because if that was an acid test, the criticism around Mandela would be different too. I mean, the Winnie Mandela situation and all of that, I'm not here to discuss that. I think that they have the right to resolve their own contradictions like we have a responsibility to resolve ours. But I do think that it is a clear contradiction that you can support people who fight for their liberation 6,000 miles away and not support yours here.
Of course, the role of the media, the big business media, has a big part in terms of not even letting people know that there's a Mutulu Shakur that exists, and also they've demonized the liberation fighters here through the media, because the role of the media is just so insidious. It's all part of the COINTELPRO program, except for a few alternative media here and there that let people know that political prisoners do exist.
That's where individual responsibility comes in. When you look at the movie Rosewood, you look at the new and upcoming actors and the power that they are getting, the work and the Malcolm X period back a couple of years ago. I mean, the search for the mafia type to present. There's so many historical, heroic. Shasha Brown was just a tremendous human being for us in the 60s, in the 70s. Twyman Myers, a young man who fought hard for black people, who was shot over 40 times in the streets of the Bronx. We're talking about, you want adventure? You're looking for these type of so-called tough guys? There's so many. Frankie May Adams, Assata Shakur, Muhammad Ibn Ifedun, what are we talking about? Where are you going for your adventure? Make stories out of our heroes. Why you gotta go somewhere to find it? That's your responsibility. That was not the media. You can disguise it. You don't have to say their real name. And then let them search for the truth. You think all the stories we see on the TV about the mafia is true? All the names are true? No, they just give you a bunch of soup and you go for it. We have to take responsibility for ourselves. When I was in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe during the war, and I was able to see that we have an impression that only those people who stand up straight, look clear, are going to be the ones at the end of the victory. It was good.